Billionaire's sister spilled wine on the black CEO seconds later. Her $7.9B legacy crumbled. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Hey Blackie, go serve. The words didn't just cut through the ballroom, they detonated inside it. Conversation died mid-sentence. Glasses froze mid-air. Even the chandelier, dripping in warm gold light, seemed to hesitate as if the crystals themselves recoiled from the sound. At the center of the long banquet table, beneath sweeping cascades of ivory florals, she sat the black woman in a gown of sunlit gold, not trembling, not shrinking. Her posture was a line carved from quiet storm. Her eyes lifted, slow and unhurried, toward the source of the voice. A woman in a velvet crimson dress stood over her, champagne bottle tilted, fury twisting her features into something sharp and entitled. In the glow of chandeliers, the liquid caught the light as it spilled a glittering arc, a mockery of celebration, and splashed down onto the black woman's gown. Gasps fluttered like startled birds around the room. Some mouths fell open. Others twisted into uncomfortable smirks. A few phones rose discreetly, cameras blooming like hungry insects catching the scent of scandal. The woman in red wasn't done. "You heard me," she snarled, voice thick with disdain. "People like you don't sit at this table. You serve it." The champagne continued to drip, a slow trail down the gold fabric, pooling at the base like melted sunlight curdled into something bitter. The black woman didn't break eye contact. Her calm was too steady, unnerving, almost unnatural in a room trained to expect fear from those being humiliated. Around them, the gala's grandeur morphed into a cruel theater. Polished silverware, ornate candelabras, white roses arranged with obsessive precision, all now props in a stage play about power, privilege, and the ease with which cruelty found its voice. People watched, waiting, hoping someone else would intervene first, but no one did. Social courage was always lighter than crystal and twice as fragile. The woman in red leaned closer, her breath hot with champagne and arrogance. "Stand up and move," she hissed. "This section is for donors, not whatever you are." A ripple of soft, ugly laughter traveled down the table. A man in a tuxedo whispered too loudly, "Maybe she's lost. Staff corridors are in the back." Another woman chimed in, "They'll let anyone in these days, won't they?" The black woman's hands remained still in her lap, fingers relaxed, uncurled. Nothing about her posture suggested panic. Her breathing didn't quicken. Her gaze didn't dart for exits or allies. Instead, she tilted her chin upward a fraction, a gesture subtle yet seismic. Silence tightened its grip on the ballroom. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The woman in red seemed energized by the quiet, mistaking it for control. She shifted her stance, raising her voice now that she had an audience. "Honestly," she scoffed, "you should be grateful anyone even let you walk through the front door. Look around, this is not your world." But something in the air disagreed. A temperature drop, barely perceptible, but present, like the room was exhaling in anticipation of something it didn't understand. The black woman finally moved. She lifted one hand, slow enough to feel like time was bending around her. Her fingertips brushed the wet fabric of her gown, tracing the cold champagne soaking through the gold. She looked down, studying the stain as if it were an equation only she could solve. Then she looked back up. Her eyes steady, unflinching, dissecting pinned the woman in red in place. Not with anger, not with hurt, but with something far more dangerous in a room full of people who believed their wealth made them untouchable. Clarity. A single moment of perfect, devastating clarity. The crowd sensed the shift. A few straightened in their chairs. One or two lowered their cameras without realizing why. Even the orchestra, positioned in the far corner, faltered mid-note as if pulled by an unseen force. The woman in red, emboldened but foolish, leaned down to whisper one more insult. Her lips curved into a poisonous smile as she breathed out, "You don't belong here." But her voice, dripping with venom, couldn't pierce the quiet like it did before. Because now something else was moving in the space between humiliation and consequence. Something subtle, cold, inevitable. The black woman reached for her phone, a small motion, but the kind that ends empires. And in that gilded room, beneath diamonds and chandeliers in the gaze of 100 watching witnesses, everyone felt it. This was the last second before the storm arrived. The ballroom didn't breathe. It only watched. The black woman's fingers slid across her phone screen with the elegance of someone performing a well-practiced ritual. No rush, no panic, just precision. A single, silent command, delivered through a few taps invisible to everyone at the table, except the woman who had just drenched her in champagne. Across the room, a handful of guests exchanged confused glances. They didn't know why their stomachs tightened. They couldn't explain why the air felt suddenly heavier, or why the chandeliers above them seemed to dim as though anticipating a shift in hierarchy. But they felt it. Instinct recognizes power before logic does. The woman in red laughed an impulsive, brittle sound. "Oh, please," she scoffed, lifting her glass as if to toast her own cruelty. Is she texting the manager? Or checking Yelp reviews? Honestly, this is pathetic. But her voice didn't carry the same dominance it held moments ago. It wavered, ever so slightly, like silk starting to fray. Something in the stillness of the black woman's posture unsettled her. A server passing by paused mid-step. He wasn't watching the woman in red. He was watching the black woman as if sensing that she was not the one in danger of being removed from this table. The black woman set her phone down gently, screen dimming to black. Her hands returned to her lap. Her posture remained unfazed, composed, dignified. It was the composure of someone who had learned long ago that the world's loudest cruelty could not compete with quiet power. Across the table, a middle-aged man in a midnight tuxedo cleared his throat, trying to reassemble the social script that had fallen apart. "Perhaps," he offered cautiously, "we should continue with the evening?" The woman in red turned sharply toward him. "Continue? After this?" She scoffed, gesturing furiously at the soaked gown. "She's sitting here like she owns the place." A murmur swept through nearby guests, the soft rustle of shifting allegiances. Some tilted subtly away from her, sensing danger in proximity. Others leaned closer to the black woman without even realizing they were doing it. Fear moves people, but so does gravity. And the gravity in the room had quietly changed direction. From across the hall came a faint buzzing, a cluster of phones lighting up almost simultaneously. A pair of donors frowned at their screens, then another, then another. Their surprised expressions rippled outward like falling dominoes. The woman in red noticed. "What? What's happening? Why is everyone—" A guest whispered to his wife. "That can't be real." Another muttered, "Is this a glitch?" A third said nothing, just stared, face draining of color. The woman in red snatched her own phone from the table and looked at the notification. Her smile collapsed. A broadcast alert from multiple financial networks. A freeze order on corporate assets. A sudden suspension of a major merger. The name attached to the initiating authority. Her breath hitched. "No, no, this is a mistake," she whispered. Around the table, whispers charged the air like static. Isn't that her family's company? They were depending on that deal. Wait, who has the power to shut down something that size? Every head turned back toward the black woman. She hadn't moved. She just sat there, soaked in champagne, glowing under chandelier light, with an ease so commanding it felt like the room itself was waiting for her next breath. The woman in red clutched the back of her chair, knuckles whitening. "Who? Who are you?" she demanded, voice cracking. The black woman lifted her gaze, unhurried and exact. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because across the banquet hall, a screen near the stage flickered and a new message appeared, bold and inescapable. Emergency corporate notice. Merger authorization. Revoked by primary executive shareholder. A few guests gasped. Others rose from their seats. A cluster of investors stumbled toward the exit, phones pressed to their ears. The woman in red stared at the glowing screen as though it were her death sentence. Her lips parted. "No, that's impossible. The shareholder, they're anonymous. They're—" She stopped. Slowly, deliberately, the black woman reached for her napkin and dabbed the champagne from her wrist. Calm, controlled, lethal. The woman in red stepped back a fraction, voice trembling. "It's you." The room drenched in gold and silence finally understood. The realization didn't hit the ballroom all at once. It unfurled slowly, like a curtain drawn back to reveal a truth far too large for the stage it was given. The woman in red staggered a step, gripping the table's edge, as though the linen-draped surface could steady her collapsing world. Her eyes flicked between the black woman and the glowing screen, unable to reconcile the humiliation she had just delivered with the authority now staring back at her. A nearby guest whispered, "She's the primary shareholder?" Another responded, "She didn't even flinch when the champagne hit her." "Of course she is. And the go is oppivality." Someone else murmured, "God, we just watched her sign a death sentence in real time." The orchestra, sensing the tension but not understanding its origin, attempted to resume playing, but the notes wobbled, uncertain, and fell apart entirely when the conductor noticed half the audience wasn't listening anymore. His baton hung mid-air before he lowered it quietly, conceding to the moment. At the far end of the room, a young event coordinator rushed toward the stage, her headset blinking with frantic updates. She reached the screen's control panel, hesitated, then touched her earpiece. "The system's locked," she whispered helplessly. "Someone's overriding from higher authority." There was only one person in the room who could do that, the black woman. She didn't stand. She didn't speak. She didn't even acknowledge the chaos she'd unleashed. Her silence was its own verdict. The woman in red swallowed painfully. You can't just ruin people like this." Her voice wavered, desperate. "You don't know what this means for my family." The black woman blinked once slow, like a judge marking the time before delivering the final blow. A man 2 seats down leaned forward, voice lowered. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you poured champagne on her." The woman in red spun toward him. "You stay out of this." But she could hear it now, the shift. The room wasn't hers anymore. The crowd wasn't hers. Even her own confidence wasn't hers. The murmurs grew, a low current weaving through the rows of tables. "She has controlling interest." That explains the anonymous board votes. No wonder the shares jumped last quarter. She's been the phantom power all along. Panic flickered across the woman in red's face. She turned back toward the black woman, grasping for rationality, for negotiation, for anything that looked like solid ground. If there's been a misunderstanding," she said, voice trembling, "I can apologize. We can fix this. We can." The black woman gently placed her napkin beside her plate. It was such a soft movement, but it carried the weight of a guillotine dropping. Around them, several guests unconsciously held their breath. A server standing behind the woman in red shifted uncomfortably, as though witnessing something sacred or dangerous. He stepped back, giving space without knowing why. The woman in red tried again, her voice cracking. "Please. My family. We're barely holding things together right now. This merger was everything to us." A beat. The black woman finally moved her gaze, letting it drift across the glittering room, down the long table, across the chandeliers, over the sea of faces that had laughed, mocked, or watched in silence when cruelty took the microphone. She let the weight of their complicity settle. Then she returned her gaze to the woman in red and spoke for the first time since the champagne hit her gown. "You made one mistake," she said softly. "You thought humiliation had no witnesses." The words were calm, precise, devastating. A tremor rippled through the crowd. The woman in red shook her head, tears threatening. "We can talk about this. Please, you don't know what you're destroying." The black woman leaned forward slightly, not threatening, not aggressive, simply resolute. "You destroyed it yourself," she said. "I'm simply removing the scaffolding that was hiding the cracks." Af grated. Across the room, more phones buzzed. A wave of notifications hit the attendees in synchronized rhythm. Stock plunge alerts, press statements from investment partners withdrawing, emergency board meetings scheduled, liquidity freezes in effect. Guests began rising from their seats, not out of respect but fear of being too close to a crumbling empire. The woman in red's legs buckled. She reached for a chair, missed, and caught herself on the tablecloth instead. "You can't do this," she whispered. The black woman didn't blink. "It's already done." The ballroom's grandeur had become a cage, golden, glittering, inescapable. And the woman in red was trapped inside it, trembling. Guests peeled away from her like petals falling from a dying flower. No one wanted to be the last one standing beside a collapsing dynasty. The room that once orbited her family now shifted its gravitational pull toward the black woman, quiet, still, and frighteningly composed. A man at the far end of the table cleared his throat. We, we should alert the board, he muttered to his wife, already stepping back. She nodded, clutching her clutch like a lifeline, and they retreated without another glance at the woman in red. In moments, half the table had evacuated. Across the ballroom, screens flickered again, this time switching to a breaking financial ticker. Red numbers cascaded downward, shares tumbling, bonds suspended, partnerships dissolving in real time. The conductor, realizing the gala had transformed into a funeral march with no corpse yet delivered, set down his baton. The musicians lowered their instruments one by one, unsure whether to pack up or simply watch history unravel. And still, the black woman remained seated, unmoved, unrushed, unbothered. The woman in red inhaled shakily, forcing strength into her trembling voice. Listen, listen to me. You don't understand the consequences. Thousands of people depend on us. My family, our employees, our subsidiaries. Her voice fissured. We'll lose everything. The black woman tilted her head slightly, as if examining an artifact rather than a human unraveling. Do you know, she said quietly, that's the first truthful thing you've said tonight? The woman in red blinked, stunned into silence. The black woman continued, each word measured like a sentence being handed down. You thought my silence meant insignificance. But silence is where power gathers before it chooses its direction. A hush rippled across the room. A waiter paused mid-pour. A group near the entrance leaned closer. It was the kind of statement people would quote later, after their shock turned into retrospect. The woman in red wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. Please, she whispered, tell me what to do. I'll fix it. I swear I'll fix it. The black woman didn't laugh. She didn't soften. She simply spoke the truth. You can't fix what you never built. The woman in red's breath shuddered out of her lungs. She sagged into a nearby chair, broken in a way that had nothing to do with finances. The black woman shifted her gaze toward the stage. A young technician stood there, waiting, as though he instinctively knew she would need the room's full attention soon. Their eyes met for a brief second, and he straightened, no instructions given, but understanding delivered. A notification pinged across phones again. SEC scrutiny initiated. Federal review flagged. Assets under emergency audit. The murmurs rose, frantic and uncontrolled. This is catastrophic. Her father won't survive this. They needed the merger to stay afloat. How fast? How did she do this so fast? A man wearing a silver cufflink set stepped forward, swallowing his pride along with his fear. Ma'am, he said to the black woman, bowing his head slightly. If there's anything you need, any assistance, the board will comply. His eyes darted nervously to the woman in red, as if begging forgiveness for abandoning loyalty so quickly. But he, like everyone else, knew the truth. Loyalty was a luxury. Fear was a motivator. Power was a compass. And the compass was now pointing in one direction toward the woman in gold. The woman in red saw the shifting alliance. Her voice cracked again. They're all leaving me. No, the black woman replied calmly. They're seeing you. Up again. The words landed more painfully than any public attack could have. A sudden commotion at the double doors turned heads. A man in a charcoal suit, flushed, sweating, frantic, pushed into the ballroom. His tie was askew, his breathing ragged. The guests parted instinctively. It was the woman in red's brother, the heir, the executive face of their collapsing $7. 9B empire. Where is she? He demanded, scanning the room. What happened? Why are our accounts? Then he saw the black woman, and his voice died. The truth washed over him like a drowning wave. His eyes widened, not in confusion but recognition. He knew exactly who she was. The silhouette, the privacy, the rumors of the anonymous power behind multiple Fortune 500 deals. You, he whispered, horrified. You're the one. You're the silent investor. She didn't nod. She didn't confirm. She simply existed with the gravity of someone who no longer needed to clarify anything. His voice quaked. Please tell me we can salvage this. Her gaze lifted. Unforgiving. Steady. Cold. You should pray, she said, that tonight is the worst of it. The brother's breath hitched as though the air itself had turned hostile. Around him, the ballroom shifted again, a murmur swelling like a tide preparing to pull everything into its undertow. Guests drew back, forming a widening ring. No one wanted to stand too close to a man watching the ruin of his family unfold in real time. The black woman didn't stand. She didn't need height to tower over him. Her stillness alone was elevation. The brother tried to gather himself, smoothing his suit jacket with trembling hands. He approached the table slowly, each step heavier than the last, as if gravity thickened around him. He stopped 2 feet from her chair. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding, he said, voice cracking beneath rehearsed diplomacy. My sister can be impulsive, emotional, but we cannot let one incident jeopardize years of partnership. You know what this deal means. His voice splintered. He swallowed hard. To thousands of employees. There it was. The family's favorite shield. The invisible workforce suddenly summoned as moral collateral. The black woman blinked once. A small, measured movement. It cut more deeply than any spoken condemnation. You don't get to hide behind them now, she replied, softness sharpened into verdict. The brother's jaw clenched. Then let us correct it. We'll make a public statement, apologize, issue a personal letter, donate to whatever foundation you choose. We can even increase your equity if that's what it takes to resolve. A ripple of gas jerked the room. He had said the forbidden thing aloud, that equity could be offered to control dignity. Even he realized it too late. The black woman exhaled slow, deliberate, as if releasing the last of her restraint. She lifted her phone from the table, its screen glowing back to life. A single notification waited. She read it. Then she raised her eyes to him. Her voice landed like stone, dropped into a silent lake. It's already resolved. The brother flinched. What do you mean? Across the ballroom, the LED screens flickered again. Guests turned, afraid to watch but unable to look away. A new banner rolled across the screen. Breaking. Federal inquiry initiated allegations of fraudulent reporting at Vance Holdings. The brother staggered backward. No, that's confidential. Those reports were sealed. Not anymore, she said. A tremor passed through the guests. The chandeliers seemed to hum. The woman in red covered her mouth, eyes wide with terror. You triggered an investigation? The black woman tilted her head. I illuminated what was already true. The brother's composure cracked. His voice rose, desperate. Do you understand what this will do to us? Our lenders will panic, our investors will run, we could lose everything. You already have, she said. He shook his head violently. You don't know what we've been dealing with. We're drowning. This merger was survival. It was our last, our only chance. And yet, she replied, you used your last night of power to humiliate someone you believed beneath you. Silence crushed the room. The woman in red began to cry, soft, shaky sobs that echoed off the polished marble. Her brother turned toward her, helpless. What were you thinking? He choked. This isn't the kind of person you antagonize. His sister sobbed harder. I didn't know, she didn't look, I didn't think. That, the black woman said, was your true failure. The brother clasped his hands, pleading now. Please, your decision will destroy us. Give me something. A path. Anything. She studied him not with cruelty, but with clarity. You used your voice to wound, she said. I use mine to correct. And then, without raising her tone, she ended the conversation. The merger is dead. The shields protecting your empire are gone. And the consequences began the moment the champagne touched my dress. The brother's knees weakened. He gripped the back of a chair to stay upright. God, this can't be happening. The black woman lifted her chin slightly, a gesture of calm dominion. It is, she said, and it will continue. At that moment, another wave of notifications rolled across the room. Guests looked down at their phones, and panic erupted. Partnership withdrawals, account freezes, creditor demands, press leaks. Everything was collapsing in real time. The brother whispered, voice barely audible, please, stop this. But she had already turned her gaze away. Not because she was finished, because the storm was only beginning. The storm didn't roar. It spread quiet, precise, surgical. The ballroom, moments ago a monument to excess, now pulsed with a different energy. People weren't mingling anymore. They were migrating. Clusters of donors, executives, and socialites drifted toward exits, each step guided by fear rather than etiquette. Their eyes stayed glued to their glowing screens, reading updates that reshaped the world they thought they understood. The black woman observed them without rising. She didn't need spectacle. She didn't need noise. Power in its truest form didn't beg to be acknowledged. It simply changed the air. Across from her, the brother pressed trembling fingers to his temples as Notification after notification bombarded him. Credit line suspended. Emergency board meeting demanded. Partner withdrawal, immediate effect. Market speculation signals collapse. Each alert was a hammer striking the pillars of his family's empire. He looked up at her, eyes wide and haunted. You've turned everyone against us. She shook her head slowly. No, she said. You showed them who you really were. I simply removed the veil. The woman in red clutched her champagne-stained dress, tears streaking down her cheeks. Her voice was hoarse from crying. You don't understand what our father will do. What happens to us now? You can't just leave us with nothing. The black woman's gaze hardened. You walked toward nothingness the moment you assumed I was powerless. A sudden commotion erupted at the ballroom entrance. Security. Not the hotels. Not the events. A private team unmistakably hers. Sleek suits, encrypted earpieces, the posture of quiet dominance. They stepped inside calmly, forming a perimeter near the walls. Not intrusive but undeniable. The crowd recoiled in collective recognition. When private security moved like that, it wasn't for protection. It was for transition. The brother stared at them in disbelief. Why? Why are they here? For due process, she answered. He looked like he might collapse. Due. Process for what? The black woman lifted her phone again. Another message awaited her, a confirmation this time. She read it and set the phone down with a soft click that echoed louder in the silence than any scream could have. Your father is being escorted from his office, she said. Shock tore across his face. What? You had him removed? I had him confronted, she corrected. The removal was voluntary. The evidence was not. Evidence. The word hung in the air like a blade. The woman in red tried to stand, but her legs buckled. She sank back into the chair, whispering, This isn't fairness. This is annihilation. The black woman's eyes sharpened. No, she said. This is accountability. Something your family believed only applied to others. She rose at last. The moment she stood, the entire ballroom seemed to inhale sharply as though gravity itself adjusted to her height. Her gown, still damp from champagne, glistened under the chandeliers like liquid sunlight reclaiming its shine. She walked around the table with steps slow and deliberate. Every gaze followed her, partly in awe, partly in fear, but mostly in the recognition that they were witnessing something irreversible. She stopped in front of the brother. You asked for a path, she said. Here it is. Hope flickered in his eyes, faint, foolish, desperate. Anything, tell me. She leaned in slightly. Watch, she said, and learn. Then she turned toward the stage. The technician straightened instinctively, ready. A single nod from her was all it took. The screens changed again, not chaotic red tickers or emergency alerts this time, but a stark, clean announcement. Effective immediately, Vance Holdings placed under external executive supervision. A hush swept through the crowd. The brother stumbled backward. My God. She's taking control. A guest whispered. No. She already had it. This has been in the question. The woman in red buried her face in her hands. The black woman spoke, voice steady enough to anchor the room. Your empire wasn't destroyed tonight. It crumbled the moment you decided dignity was optional. She turned, preparing to step away from them. But before she did, she added, and now, the world will see what leadership looks like without inherited cruelty holding the throne. The brother fell silent. The sister stopped crying, because both of them finally understood. This wasn't the end of the storm. It was only the reveal of its eye. Chaos spreads fast in a room built on reputation. But in a room built on illusion, it spreads even faster. By the time the black woman stepped away from the table, the ballroom had transformed into a battlefield of whispered phone calls, frantic texts, and crumbling alliances. The chandeliers still glowed with their golden arrogance, but everything beneath them had shifted: status, power, certainty, all dissolving like sugar in hot water. The musicians abandoned their instruments, unsure whether to stay or run. Servers froze mid-aisle, clutching trays of untouched champagne. A few high-ranking donors huddled behind columns, whispering like exiled courtiers terrified to be seen choosing the wrong side of history. And at the center of the storm, the Vance siblings clawed at the remains of their world. The brother's voice cracked through the noise. Where is Dad now? They can't just... This is illegal. This is... One of the black woman's security staff stepped forward. Not aggressively, not intrusively, just enough to make his presence unmistakable. Sir, he said calmly, you may want to check the latest alert. The brother fumbled for his phone with shaking hands. A notification glared up at him. Breaking Federal Oversight Committee confirms evidence of financial misconduct at Vance Holdings. His face drained of color. No, no, that's impossible. It was buried. That report was... He bit his tongue too late, realizing he had said far too much in a public ballroom filled with cameras. The woman in red stared at him through tear-blurred lashes. "What report?" she whispered. "What did you and Dad hide?" He recoiled as if struck. "This isn't the time." "It's exactly the time." The guests leaned closer, not out of compassion, but because scandal made irresistible gravity. Their empire wasn't just crumbling. It was revealing rot layer by layer, and the entire room could smell it. The black woman continued walking toward the stage, each step echoing across marble floors like punctuation. Her gown swayed behind her, a golden afterimage in the air. She reached the stairs and ascended with a calm that made every collapsing ego in the room feel even smaller. At the top, she paused just long enough for silence to sweep the hall like a velvet curtain. Then the screens shifted again. No numbers, no warnings, just a clean slide. Council notice. Temporary administration assigned to Vance Holdings. Oversight to be conducted by Apex Dominion Group. A wave of whispers crashed through the hall. Apex Dominion? That's her firm. She didn't just pull the deal. She's replacing their entire leadership. This is a takeover. Someone near the front nearly dropped their glass. She just annexed a multi-billion-dollar empire at a charity gala. But it wasn't annexation. It was reclamation. The black woman turned to face the room. Her voice carried without a microphone. "Tonight was never about deals," she said. "It was about truth. And truth has a way of removing what doesn't belong." Every syllable landed like a gentle hammer, soft in volume, heavy in consequence. She looked directly at the woman in red. "You chose humiliation as currency." The woman in red sobbed harder. "Your brother chose deception as strategy." He flinched. "And your father chose secrecy as survival." Her gaze swept across the guests, each one shrinking slightly under the weight of her calm. "But power," she said, "is a mirror. It shows you exactly who you are, even when you refuse to look." A ripple ran through the audience. Not applause, not admiration, recognition. Because what she said was true, not just about the Vance family, but about them. The entire ballroom had watched cruelty unfold. They had seen humiliation and chosen silence. They had treated dignity like a luxury good, rather than a human standard. And now the bill for that silence had come due. The black woman stepped down from the stage, descending like a verdict. Her security team followed at a respectful distance, not surrounding her, but flanking her path as though protecting a crown. She stopped at the foot of the stairs. The room waited. The brother stumbled forward. "Please," he choked out. "Please, just give us time. Give us something. My sister didn't know who you were. She didn't know what was at stake." The black woman turned her head slightly. "Yes," she said. "That was the problem." Her voice dropped lower, soft, intimate, lethal. "Power shouldn't be the reason you treat someone like a human being." The brother's breath stuttered. The sister covered her mouth again. The black woman walked past them, not with disdain, but with something colder. Accurate indifference. When she reached the center of the ballroom, she spoke once more, her final statement shaping the air like a decree. "The world doesn't fall apart when you lose power. It falls apart when you mistake cruelty for strength." Gasps ghosted across the hall. She continued walking toward the exit, leaving the Vance siblings crumpled in the debris of their own entitlement. The crowd parted for her without being asked, creating a clear path, as though the universe itself aligned to let her pass. Outside the ballroom windows, snow had begun to fall, quiet, steady, untouched by the chaos inside. And in that juxtaposition, the truth was unmistakable. This wasn't the collapse of an empire. It was the rebirth of consequence. Outside the ballroom, the cold night wrapped around her like a quieter, truer world. Snowflakes drifted past the glass canopy, catching the streetlights in soft halos. Her security team waited, but she paused at the landing, lifting her face to the falling white. Across the city, headlines were already erupting. Across the markets, positions were shifting. Across the Vance empire, the foundations were splitting open. But she didn't look back. Instead, she unlocked her phone and sent a single directive to her foundation. Redirect the Reclaimed Capital Fund, Black-owned startups. Effective tonight. Justice wasn't revenge. It was redistribution. Snow followed her to the curb, settling on the gold fabric of her gown like a final, quiet coronation. Behind her, the gala's muffled panic throbbed through the doors, a broken kingdom collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. She didn't wait for the valet. She didn't spare the building a second glance. A black sedan glided to a stop, doors opening in silent recognition. She stepped inside, calm and whole, a woman who had chosen dignity over noise, truth over spectacle. As the car pulled away, the night swallowed the last echoes of the gala. Power didn't shout, it simply moved forward.